I will.
Yay!
Girls go first.
Ladies first.
Hi there. First of all, I want to thank the festival for bringing this type of material to Miami. There's not many places that I could find this, going on television or to the movies or whatever. And that's why I feel that this event is so important, not only to the film industry, but to our spiritual well-being as well. So, at one point I cried. It was very touching. Whenever I sit on these things, I never know where to. It's like I divide it up between my spirituality side, my filmmaker side, And I mean, it's sort of. I felt the film was very long. One of the hardest things to do as a filmmaker is edit. You fall in love with all of it, and when you get into the editing room, to be able to really say this is what's needed to move the story along. A film shouldn't have anything in it that isn't needed to move the story along. And when it gets so long that the audience starts leaving, I think that then it's problematic. There was a few interesting camera angles right in the very beginning, when you see that there's this war and he's running out, and they do a shaking of the film. And there was one other time that they used it when he was, I guess, having his spiritual awakening, and they sort of made it look like he was tripping or something for people my age. So, I mean, that's what the old LSD trips, visuals, so that was interesting. The film was good. I think if I was going to add anything to it was maps, so I would know historically where we were at the time, so I could, because I wrote down and I want to go home and revert to that. Now on my spiritual side, interesting enough, I just finished two Bible studies, and the last one was called The Bad Girls of the Bible. And I found myself reverting back to that Bible study, because so often we seem to think that you have to walk on water to make a good Catholic or a good Christian or a good Jew or whatever your belief is. And I have of the opinion that to really walk it is you have to know both sides of the street. And he definitely knew both sides of the street. He had that spiritual awakening that they talked about God's will, and I study this a lot, that there's two types of will. There's self-will, there's man's will, and there's God's will. And usually nothing really goes right unless we're following God's will. And yet it's so hard to know that. And you could have taken this, put new clothes on it, and everything would have been just like today. I kept thinking about the election. All those attorneys in Washington and everything that we've been going through with the election. It's just, it's the same thing happening then has been happening today. And that too was what blew my mind with it, or was relevant to me. But the idea of this point, when we finally understand, when we make that spiritual quest, that it's God's will is the only place I find true happiness. I keep looking for it with outside of myself, with successes, with the house, with the money, with the whatever. And truly, it comes from inside, that peace of truth, And I only find that when I follow God's will. And so it's always on my path how to come up with that. So that's what I got from the film. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be very brief because it's pretty late and the film was very long. And in fact, I think first let me talk about some of the things I thought were good, and then some of the things I didn't think were so good. Although I already mentioned the length, and I agree with you on that. I think, for example, the way in which they interspersed the confessions with, the action at the time that he was confessing about was pretty effective. I mean, it really made the confessions come to life. I thought that was a positive. I think that another positive was, and sort of taking off on what you said, I thought the film was very revealing about the emptiness of material life, which I think was one of the themes, and certainly his theme. Not just the material things, but power and influence. In other words, the scenes in the court and in Milan, etc. Well, in Milan was where the court was, or even before that, in Carthage. I thought that those were effective in kind of, in a subtle way, saying this is all nothing. I mean, this is all kind of useless. I thought that I loved the figure of Ambrose. I thought he was much more interesting up until the very end, almost, than Augustine. I thought he had a lot more to say until the very end, where I thought the debate with the Donathans, whatever they were, all right, those guys. I thought that was the best speech of the film for Augustine. Would really reveal, I think, very effectively his philosophy and etc. So those would be, I guess, another positive of the film is that Augustine was very cute. I mean, definitely, you could see why everybody kind of liked him. Some of the negatives, I thought that Santa Monica, Saint Monica, she looked the same in the beginning and the end. She didn't age. Now maybe that's a miracle. That could be a miracle. I don't know. But I thought that was a little, funny. I didn't understand the role of some of the people, like, for example, the young woman in the beginning who then goes on the boat. I don't know who she is. Perhaps I don't know the story. But she seemed to be superfluous, and maybe one of the kind of the issues that you were talking about keeping so much in and putting so much in. And, well, I guess those would be the things I would say at this point. And as I say, it's late, and I'm sure all of us want to get home, so I'll finish with that.
Hi. By the way, I love that I feel like I'm the captain of the Enterprise in this chair. Nobody got that? Okay. So some of the things, to go along with what you were saying, yes, there were a couple of moments in the film in a cinematic language kind of way, and if by what I mean with that, your camera choices, your editing choices, that's really the language that you're choosing to tell the movie with. Some of those I felt took me out of the context of a historical epic, and for what you were describing, for example, when it sort of seems to fast forward, that's called ramping, sort of over-cranking, different terms for it, but that's such a modern technique, and there were a couple of moments, for example, after the attack on the church, on the basilica, when he sort of starts to begin to convert, I suppose we can say, that the editing techniques were really, again, too modern, and it just took me out of the context of the time period. And it's just one of those things, is if anybody watches, next time you watch a historical, like Gladiator or something within the rough same time period, watch the camera choices, watch the angle choices. They're not going to be doing this sort of thing that they do in this movie. And I sort of, as much as I enjoyed aspects of the film, I felt that those things took me out of it completely. And yeah, I completely agree that it was a little too long. Did anybody see a couple years ago with the festival, the Mighty Max? Was it last year or 2 years ago?
First
Opening night.
It was first year.
First year, was it? Anybody see Mighty Max? Or if you haven't, please, God, rent it from Netflix. It's probably out there at Netflix. It's a wonderful film. And some of the real girls that played basketball, that were portrayed as characters in the movie, were there. And one of them said, to the director who was in the panel, said, oh, we prayed before every game, but you only showed it once in the movie. And I'm thinking, and Mighty Max is like a perfectly cut movie. It's really a tight hour and a half or whatever it is, compared to this, which I felt 20 minutes too long. Thinking of that comment, I'm going, yeah, exactly. You did pray before every game, but you only need to see it once. You know what I'm saying? You only need to see it once to get the message. So as much as I like that film, I will leave it with the same criticism. It's just a little too long, and the context of what they chose editing-wise and camera angle-wise kind of took me out a little bit of the story. And I don't know if anybody else felt the same way. I'm good.
I have a question for you.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. You pointed out the scene of his conversion, essentially. So, I wasn't that convinced by the conversion. I didn't have that catharsis. I didn't see him having it. And was the problem, do you think, the way they shot it, or was it a script problem, or was it was it essentially an editing or a camera problem?
Well, it's interesting that you say that exactly, because there's almost like two conversion scenes. I'm just going to say, there's right after the basilica, and then he sort of finds himself in the field reading, and then he goes to the church and sort of has his baptism scene. Now, I felt the baptism scene after he wakes up in the garden is, because of exactly what I'm saying, the language that they choose to, and they use what I call the Jaws shot. The sort of like looking at the sheriff on the beach, seeing the shark attack. He's looking up at the cross, and he sort of slowly realizes what's happening, or sort of awakens himself. I felt that scene worked better than right before that, which is sort of this cut up, inner quick cuts of dialogue. I thought that maybe is an aspect of that.
Thank you. I'll leave by saying, that the reason we chose this film, and most specifically the reason why we chose this film as the opening night film, is because I feel personally, as a filmmaker, as an actress, and just, again, lover of film, obviously, I think that there's a kind of an innocence to it within all of it. There's something about the casting. I do theater, I do children's theater, so I do a lot of my own casting. And as you were saying, very good-looking man. Yes, very helpful. However, there's something about his eyes, the transparency in his eyes. And I think that to a certain degree, he can't hide from us. The camera angles, the way they capture his face, it's very revealing. So, yes, length is going to feel lengthy, especially when we started half an hour late. But I think with little things like that, there's something about his vulnerability, and also the young woman who plays his wife. I found a very deep connection, that kind of longing to be there for someone. But if you don't have God at the center, then you're going to end up using each other unwillingly. But that's just how it works. So I think there's a lot of beauty in it. There's a lot of beauty that maybe late at night can get missed.